Hi, Wolf Recap here. Today, we will continue with another part of the second season of the TV series Teen Wolf. I hope you'll hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more enjoyable episodes of the series. We see Allison as she's heading to fill up her car with gasoline. She notices a guy leaving the gas station, getting on his motorcycle. But before he leaves, he looks at her in a strange way, as if he knows her. As soon as he drives away, all the lights at the gas station go out. This scares Allison, and she gets in her car, but she can't find her keys. She gets out again to look for them, but she hears the sound of the keys moving from a distance. Suddenly, someone comes from behind her, puts a black bag over her head, and kidnaps her. Allison wakes up in a strange place, tied to a chair. In front of her is Chris, her father, in the same situation. They hear a voice in the room explaining to them about the shifters and what to do if the hunter himself gets bitten. Chris then tells Allison that their family's purpose is to become leaders, and today marks the beginning of her training. He hands her a small arrow while her hands are still tied, activates the timer, and leaves. After some time, Allison manages to free herself and finds herself alone in a strange place. She is sitting in a chair, feeling bewildered. Meanwhile, the hunter who is with her father waits for her and congratulates her when she arrives. She asks him why it took her so long, and he reveals that it took him 3 hours the first time. Allison gets into her car, feeling satisfied and realizing that she indeed possesses an advantage. The next day at school, Allison and Scott participate in a climbing exercise. Allison beats Scott to the top and mocks him. The coach laughs and calls the next competitors. Stiles goes out with Erica, and he manages to climb quickly and descend. But Erica has acrophobia, and she clings to the wall, unable to climb up or down again. The coach is surprised by her condition as she had never shown such behavior before. He tries to help her, but as she walks, Scott senses something strange. However, Erica decides to climb back on her own. At that moment, the coach announces that anyone who sees Isaac should inform the principal. At the same time, Erica begins to convulse while on the wall, and Scott notices her trembling arm. He rushes to the training area, reaching Erica just as she falls. Allison approaches them, and Scott asks her how she knew Erica was here. She tells him that she felt it, and then Erica is taken to the hospital by Scott's mom. At the hospital, Mama McCall checks Erica's condition and tells Allison that the doctors are coming. She also asks Allison to stay and make sure everything is okay. Derek enters and takes Erica to an examination room, where he asks her how she's feeling when her seizures began. She tells him about the blood and how they took pictures of it. Derek offers to help her get rid of her symptoms. The next day, Jackson is in biology class, and he notices something unusual about immunity. He realizes that if someone gets bitten by something, they develop immunity to it. He thinks this might be the reason he didn't transform. He goes to Lydia after class and questions her about how she transferred her immunity to him. Lydia is upset and goes into the bathroom to cry. However, she sees 2 legs under the stall and thinks it's Peter. She opens the door but finds no one. She leaves the bathroom, confused, and finds Peter standing near the trophy case. She accuses him of being Peter, and he doesn't deny it. At the same time, Stiles visits Boyd's house and calls him, but no one answers. Erica appears and asks Stiles what he wants from Boyd. Stiles replies that he just wants to talk to him, but Erica slaps him and throws him in a trash can. Dr. Deaton hears the alarm at his clinic and rushes to see what's going on. He finds Chris holding the dead hunter's body and asks what happened. Chris tells him he's a veterinarian, but Chris doesn't believe him, saying he knows he's not just a vet. Allison is in the school cafeteria, and Scott approaches her, telling her he knows she talked to Boyd. Allison explains that she's not angry with him, but she's worried about him and what's happening around him. That's when Stiles joins them, and they discuss the situation. They realize that Boyd, Erica, and Isaac may join Derek, and they need to find them before Derek turns them into full-fledged werewolves. Scott is standing in the skating rink, talking to Boyd, and trying to convince him not to listen to Derek. He tells Boyd that Derek won't treat him better than Scott, but Boyd disagrees. He believes Derek is the right alpha for him. Here, Derek enters with Erica and Isaac and says to Scott, "Isn't it rude to talk about me like this?" Scott gets defensive and greets Derek, trying to stand his ground. Derek goes on to tell them that he's transforming them for his benefit because they increase his strength, and that they are just guard dogs for him. At this point, Derek transforms and attacks Scott, easily overpowering him and injuring him on his side. He then takes Erica and Isaac with him and leaves. Boyd goes to check on Scott and asks him if, after witnessing what happened, he still wants to be like Isaac and Erica. But Boyd tells him that no, he wants to be like Scott, and he wants the bite that Derek gave to him. Scott goes to the clinic, but the wound isn't healing like normal wounds. He asks Dr. Deaton why the wound isn't healing like all the other wounds, and Deaton explains that it's because of the alpha. In the end, we see Jackson practicing throwing a ball, and after he finishes, he gets in his car to leave. However, the car won't start, and Jackson tries to force it, but it doesn't work. Suddenly, Jackson lifts the entire car effortlessly, realizing that Derek's bite has turned him into something like them, granting him the extraordinary strength he had always dreamed of. Scott appears in the veterinary clinic, and Dr. Deaton cleans his wound. He assures Scott not to worry, it will heal, but not as quickly. Scott asks how he knows these things, and Deaton replies that it's a long story. Deaton explains that he specializes in werewolves, but what killed the hunter is something entirely different. The Argents are searching for it, and they won't stop until they figure out what this creature is. The doctor mentions that they have a book where they record information about the creatures they hunt. Suddenly, they hear someone entering, so Scott hides. They see Chris and Gerard coming into the clinic, and Gerard greets Dr. Deaton, asking how he's been since they last met. They inquire if he's made any progress after examining the hunter's body. He explains that the predator paralyzes its prey first by making a wound in the neck and then kills it. However, the unique aspect is that it doesn't collect venom to immobilize its prey, unlike other predators. It kills simply for the sake of killing. Meanwhile, Stiles is at the auto repair shop, fixing his car. When he opens the door, he finds a strange sticky substance on his hand. As soon as he picks up his phone, he feels his hands trembling, losing control over them. He notices the creature's hand on top of his car in the workshop and tries to call for help, but he can't. The paralyzing effect begins to take over his entire body. The creature injures the mechanic's neck, just like it did to the hunter, and the mechanic falls to the ground, unable to move. The creature disconnects the cable holding the car and starts to lower it onto the immobilized mechanic. Stiles desperately tries to call for help, but his hands won't cooperate. However, the creature eventually leaves, and Stiles manages to call for help. Meanwhile, Allison gets into her car to meet Scott, but Gerard intercepts her and asks to talk for a bit. He pulls out a medication from his pocket, dropping an old-looking book in the process. Allison retrieves it, and Gerard thanks her, saying that this book is very important to him. He talks about trust, saying that humans can only trust their family because anyone else might betray them. Allison agrees, and Gerard asks if he can trust her, to which she replies affirmatively. We see Stiles sitting with his father after the police arrive, explaining what happened but not mentioning the creature he saw. His father tells him that they need to impound his car as evidence, so he won't have it for a while. Lydia's mother wakes her up to go to her appointment with the school counselor. When she lifts the covers, she finds herself covered in blood. She sees her injured hand in the shattered mirror, realizing what happened. She arrives at the school counselor's office wearing gloves to hide her injuries. At the same time, Stiles talks to Scott about how Dr. Deaton told him that the Argents have a book where they record information about supernatural creatures. Scott is relieved that Gerard didn't find out about it. Lydia is seen with the school counselor, inquiring about her qualifications and making sure she can trust her. The counselor mentions her extensive education and experience. Danny checks the camera for Jackson, confirming that there was indeed tampering with the photos, and 2 hours of footage are missing. The lacrosse game begins, and Scott's team is at a significant size disadvantage compared to the opposing team. They keep getting injured, and Jackson tells Scott to take action. But Scott can't because Allison is there. Allison notices that she's cold, so Jackson lends her his jacket. She takes this opportunity to grab the keys from his jacket pocket and gives them to Stiles. Stiles, now in the office, searches for the book but doesn't find anything. He sends a message to Allison, telling her that the office is empty. However, before he can leave, Erica enters the room. During the game, Boyd can use his strength to overpower the opposing team. Erica takes Stiles and goes to the swimming pool area to meet Derek, who asks him what happened in the garage. At the same time, Scott attempts to get Boyd off the field because his eyes are glowing, which could attract attention. However, Boyd refuses and continues playing. The opposing team aggressively targets Scott and lands a hard hit on him, causing him to fall to the ground. Allison rushes to Scott and informs him that his leg is broken. Scott tries to downplay it, but his mother and the coach overhear them discussing the broken leg, wondering how they didn't hear the sound of a bone breaking. Lydia asks her grandfather if she can leave, but he insists on speaking to Scott one last time. Meanwhile, the transformed creature, unable to swim, is still in the pool area. The situation becomes more complicated when the creature attacks Erica and scratches Derek's neck, immobilizing him. Stiles decides to save Derek. Derek asks Stiles if he can see the creature, but Stiles replies that he can't and suggests that it may have left. At Lydia's house, She asks her parents if she can go out with Scott to give him some notes. Her father, Chris, refuses, but her grandfather, Gerard, agrees. Scott goes out with Allison and joins her family for dinner. Gerard attempts to facilitate communication and understanding among them, suggesting they start anew and learn to get along. In the meantime, Derek and Stiles are still in the water, with Derek unable to swim or move. Stiles tells him not to drown, and Derek reveals that he's paralyzed and can't move. Chris asks Scott to go with him to get dessert. When they enter the kitchen, Chris grabs Scott and asks what he would do if he knew the truth. Scott assures him that he won't reveal anything. Chris warns Scott about the consequences if he does. Back in the pool area, the creature continues to surround them but appears to be afraid of the water and unable to descend. At Allison's house, she asks her father if she can leave with Scott to give him some notes. Chris refuses, but her grandfather, Gerard, agrees. Scott leaves the dinner table and Scott goes out with Allison and accompanies her to her grandfather's room. They find a safe, and Scott opens it, but instead of the book, they find a cookbook. Stiles and Derek are still in the water. He calls Stiles to ask for the keys that Allison took. He mentions that the keys contain a flash drive with a compendium of information about supernatural creatures. Scott enters the school and finds the keys still by the door. He calls Stiles to inform him but is suddenly inside Gerard's room and quickly hangs up, realizing the situation. Stiles drops his phone into the water while trying to retrieve Derek. Stiles decides to rest with Derek paralyzed and unable to move. Stiles tells Derek that he can't handle more of this, to which Derek replies that he knows what the creature is. Stiles asks why Derek didn't tell them earlier, and Derek says that he wasn't sure until he saw it in the mirror. Derek explains that the creature is called the Kanima, a very malevolent being that kills for the sake of killing and must be eliminated. In the end, Scott leaves to pick up his mother from work, but as he exits the car, Allison's grandfather, Gerard, attacks him with a knife, accusing him of deception and threatening dire consequences if he doesn't stay away from Allison. Jackson's appearance as he trains with weights much heavier than he used to lift, attempting to discover his new abilities. Danny enters and offers to help, but Jackson insists he doesn't need assistance. Danny mentions that he's just checking on him, concerned that lifting heavy weights might harm him. Danny leaves, and Jackson continues his training, feeling a presence in the training room. Erica appears and takes him with her to meet Derek. Derek asks Jackson what happened to him on the night of the full moon, but Jackson denies anything significant occurred. Derek remains skeptical, prompting Jackson to mention that he recorded today's events on camera to prove himself. Derek claims he has another way to prove it and drinks a drop of snake venom to observe its effects. Jackson falls to the ground and feels somewhat paralyzed but doesn't transform or change further. Derek tells Jackson that despite being selfish and acting like a jerk, he's not the one he's searching for. Before leaving, Derek asks Jackson for a favor. The next day, Jackson goes to the police station and changes his previous statement about Isaac and his father, which had led Officer Nawahu to accuse Isaac of murdering his father. Stiles rushes to Scott during class to tell him important news. He overheard Scott's father talking about Isaac's innocence that morning. Stiles presses Scott to confront Jackson about it, but Scott says he doesn't know him. Stiles insists, saying it's important, and Scott reluctantly agrees. Isaac returns to school and joins their class. Afterwards, Jackson rushes into the classroom, asking Scott and Stiles about the Kanima. Scott tells him that he heard from Erica and Isaac, but Stiles defends Lydia, insisting she couldn't be the Kanima. Jackson reveals that he saw the Kanima and looked into its eyes, certain it's not Lydia. Meanwhile, Lydia continues to experience hallucinations and sees Peter standing at a chalkboard, writing in an unknown language. She confronts him, but Peter erases everything and leaves. Scott asks Derek if he's not going to kill Lydia, but he wants to confirm whether she is the Kanima first. They spot Erica and Isaac entering their classroom, so Scott and Stiles sit next to Lydia to protect her from them. However, the teacher separates them into different groups. The teacher selects Scott and Erica for one group, and he tries to talk to Derek privately, believing Lydia is not the Kanima. The teacher gives Lydia the experiment and watches her, but she doesn't react to the snake venom or change in any way. Scott, Stiles, and Allison meet after class to figure out their plan. Scott suggests they need to prove that Lydia isn't the Kanima before Derek kills her. Allison mentions trying to find something in her grandfather's book, but Stiles says it's in an unknown language, and they can't decipher it. During Lydia's counseling session, she describes seeing everything as a butterfly, even the wolf. The counselor encourages her to be more straightforward to help her. Danny asks Jackson who he thinks could enter his house at any time. Lydia then enters the room with Stiles, and Jackson suspects Lydia was the one who broke into his house and altered the video. At this point, Allison takes a picture of the Kanima from her grandfather's book, and she goes to the school counselor to get it translated. The counselor is able to understand the language in the paper, and she tells Allison that it's written in ancient Romanian. She asks Allison to leave the paper with her, but Allison insists on having it translated right away. She informs Allison that it contains information about a creature that used to transform into a small animal in its youth, feeling loneliness and seeking a friend. Scott tries to talk to Derek, but Boyd stops him, and Derek comes out to speak with him. Scott attempts to convince Derek that there is no evidence that Lydia is the canimagist because the venom didn't work on her. However, Derek remains determined that she is the canima. Stiles, Allison, and Jackson then take Lydia out of school and head to Stiles' house. When they enter, Stiles locks the door and secures it with a chair, which surprises Lydia. Stiles tells her that there have been numerous break-ins in the area, explaining his actions. Jackson accompanies Lydia to Stiles' room and asks her about his house key. Lydia tells him that she hasn't returned it yet, and Jackson questions her, accusing her of intentionally preventing him from seeing the changes that have occurred to him. Lydia claims she doesn't understand him but hands him the key anyway. Jackson notices a bead of sweat on Lydia's forehead and hears her heart rate increase, realizing that she's lying. He confronts her, questioning why she came to his house while he was asleep and altered the 2 hours of his video. He believes she did it to prevent him from seeing the changes that have occurred to him. Meanwhile, Scott returns to school, but the coach calls him and asks about some equipment that Danny was wearing during practice that got damaged. Scott tries to question Danny about how it happened, but Danny insists that it wasn't him. He reminds Scott that they swapped roles during the game, with Scott as the goalkeeper. Danny is still waiting for the video to be repaired so he can watch it. During this time, Allison calls Scott and urgently asks him to go to Stiles' house. Scott rushes there, and just as the video begins to play, they see that Jackson woke up from sleep and sat on the bed with his eyes glowing similar to the canima's eyes. Meanwhile, Stiles and Allison are on the ground floor of Stiles' house, keeping an eye on Derek and his team. Stiles is worried that they are within the archery range and might shoot at them with her arrow. However, Allison points out that there are only 3 of them. They look out the window and indeed see 3 individuals. Isaac is missing from the group. Stiles wonders how they can be 3 when there were 4 earlier. Through the window, they see Isaac locked outside the house, and he's unable to enter. Lydia then approaches Allison and tells her to go back and take care of herself. She goes back to the room but doesn't find Jackson there, and the window is open. Lydia calls the police. Erica enters the house and attacks Allison, who retaliates with her arrow, but Erica grabs it. She falls to the ground after touching the arrow with the snake venom that paralyzes them. Derek thinks they've succeeded in dealing with Lydia, but then he notices the door opening, and Isaac and Erica are thrown out of the house. Scott returns at that moment. In the end, Derek tells Scott that he now understands why he refused to join his pack. He realizes that while he may be the leader of the pack, he doesn't possess the same strength as Scott. They spot the canima walking on the roof of the house and see Lydia running out of the house to inform them about what's happening. They discover that Jackson is the canima. Jackson runs into the street, places his hand on a car window from the outside, and we see a hand that resembles his on the inside of the glass. The car drives away, and Jackson enters the forest. The missing part from Jackson's video reappears after Danny manages to recover it. He sends Jackson a message that he has fixed the video and leaves his tablet in his car before leaving. At that time, Derek is chasing after Jackson after he escaped from Stiles' house. Allison arrives at Lydia's house and tells her to promise that no one will know what happened today. However, Lydia insists that she can promise but wants to understand what actually happened. She expresses her confusion about the strange events at Stiles' house and questions why they all acted strangely, including Erica and Isaac. Lydia asks Allison if she knows what was going on, but Allison can't explain it. She mentions that her father forbade her from seeing Scott, and if he finds out they met yesterday, he will punish her. Lydia promises not to reveal that she and Scott met. Scott can smell Derek's location and communicates with Stiles, who leaves the car to search for them. Derek and Jackson engage in a physical fight, but Jackson's strength is formidable, and he can defend himself effectively. Chris Argent arrives and tries to stop Jackson by using fire. Jackson falls to the ground, but he quickly rises again, and Chris fires more rounds, but they run out. Jackson attacks Chris, who falls to the ground, and Gerard, Jackson's father, stands nearby watching. Scott arrives and saves Chris from Jackson, who then escapes. Scott returns to Stiles, and Stiles asks him where Jackson went. Scott says he doesn't know, he lost track of him. Stiles then sees Jackson emerging from a nightclub. He questions why Jackson would want to go into a nightclub and what he plans to do there. Scott, observing Jackson from a distance, can't pick up his scent, but Stiles tells Scott to try to find Danny, who is standing nearby. Scott approaches Danny but is unable to get any information from him. The club becomes chaotic as people panic and flee. Scott and Stiles notice bloodstains. Jackson eventually reverts to his human form, lying on the ground and seemingly unaware of his surroundings. Scott asks Stiles what they should do now, and Stiles suggests they get Jackson out of there. An ambulance arrives to attend to the injured, including Danny and his friends. Scott tries to obtain information from Danny, but Danny remains silent. Stiles gets in the car with Jackson, and they drive away from the scene. However, Jackson is angry and tells Stiles that he will report him and Scott for kidnapping him. Stiles manages to hide Jackson in a police car of the same make and model, successfully evading detection. Meanwhile, Chris Sargent, Gerard, and others are discussing the events. Chris mentions that it was his first time seeing Derek since Kate's death, and he is puzzled about Derek's actions. He questions what Derek intended to achieve by acting that way. Chris decides to take the responsibility of handling the situation, and Gerard suggests he finds another way to get the information he seeks. Gerard is interested in the truth and hints at his involvement. As Stiles and Scott drive away with Jackson hidden in the police car, Stiles receives a call from Jackson's father, who has reported Jackson missing to the police. At the same time, Stiles and Scott are still driving and remain unaware of the police presence. Stiles thinks that they have successfully concealed Jackson's whereabouts. The next day, Scott and Stiles are walking together, wondering what to do next. Stiles mentions that Jackson may have been trying to send a message when he turned into a Kanema. Scott asks Stiles if he knows where Jackson is, but Stiles doesn't have a clear answer. He is worried about their current predicament and is unsure of how to proceed. Suddenly, they see a police car passing by, and Stiles realizes that their situation is more precarious than they thought. They continue to discuss their options and what to do about Jackson, who is still hidden in the police car. He asks her again after he checks her pulse so that he can tell if she's lying or not. Asks her, "What's your connection to all of this?" Allison initially gets defensive and says, "No," but then corrects herself and says, "I don't know." He tells her that her heart rate went up, and she says it's because he's scaring her. He apologizes, saying that he shouldn't have treated her that way and asks her to go back to her class. Allison leaves the room and finds them installing surveillance cameras in the school. Meanwhile, Stiles is sitting with Jackson, telling him everything that happened, but Jackson can't remember anything except that he doesn't believe any of it. Stiles mentions that Jackson was going to kill Danny, and Jackson asks why he would want to do that when Danny is his closest friend. Scott tries to understand the reasons for all this. However, Jackson just tells them they should get a lawyer because he's not going to stay with them after he leaves here. We see Allison at school coming out of the class her mother is teaching. Before she leaves, her mother asks her why there are so many calls between her and Stiles. Allison replies that Stiles is Lydia's friend, and they told her to keep an eye on him. Her mother comments that she sees Allison trying not to look at Scott. She praises Allison for being strong and not like other girls at school who are only concerned about getting invited to a graduation party. Allison responds, "Well, being strong won't stop me from going to the graduation party." Her mother advises her to be strong but to go with someone other than Scott, reminding her that her strength is the only thing that has kept her alive so far. Allison goes to Stiles in the woods and tells him that Jackson's parents have informed the police. Stiles is surprised because he sent them a message from Jackson's phone yesterday, saying he was staying with a friend. But Allison says that her grandfather told her that the police were notified in the morning. Stiles turns on the radio and hears that the police are heading to the woods. Jackson makes a call from his phone to his parents and throws it away. He then runs to the car with Allison, and they drive off. Meanwhile, Scott is with Danny in the hospital, trying to understand if there's any issue between Jackson and him that would make Jackson want to kill him. Danny reassures Scott that their relationship has always been good, especially since Danny has been helping him out recently. Scott asks Danny about the favor he mentioned earlier, but Danny initially refuses to say anything, claiming it's a secret. However, Scott manages to press Danny, who eventually reveals that he will make a fake ID for Scott, making him older, so he can get into the nightclub again. Scott then rushes to find Stiles, as he needs to retrieve the tablet with the video they recorded. However, Scott's mother confronts him about his low grades and how he may have to repeat the year. Scott assures her that he will study with Stiles to improve his grades. Scott arrives at the car where Danny's tablet is supposed to be, but someone else has already taken it. He listens to a conversation between Stiles, Allison, and Jackson on his phone, where they discuss what's happening with Jackson and the mysterious person trying to protect him. Scott wonders who could be behind all this and why they are trying to protect Jackson. He is puzzled by the situation and the lack of clear answers. He realizes that Jackson is listening to their conversation as his hand undergoes a transformation. Scott tells Allison that he remembers the day when he was going to kill her and Jackson. He had something to stop him and protect him from himself. He urges them to try to save Jackson while they still can. They rush to Stiles, who informs them that they need to see what's happening. Jackson has escaped from the car. Allison says they need to inform her dad so he can take action before Jackson kills someone else. Stiles agrees, saying that he also needs to inform his dad. Allison asks Stiles if he thinks her dad will believe him, and Scott reassures her, saying, "He'll definitely believe me." Allison returns home and finds Lydia waiting for her. She tells Lydia that she's not feeling well today and won't be able to stay with her. But Lydia insists, saying she needs to talk to someone and can't find anyone else to listen to her. Here, Allison tells Lydia that not everything a person desires happens instantly, recounting her own frustration in trying to translate some old Roman papers and not finding anyone to help her. Lydia surprises her by saying she knows ancient Roman and offers to help translate the papers. Meanwhile, Scott and Stiles have arrived at the police station and entered Stiles' dad's office, only to find Jackson and his dad there. In the end, Lydia manages to translate the paper for Allison, revealing that the kanama isn't looking for a friend, it's looking for a master, meaning someone is controlling Jackson, not protecting him. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support us in completing the episodes.